Why are you still addicted? Even after ego death. You've done the work, meditation, breathwork, journaling, yoga. You've cried your soul out in the jungle, squirting liquid from your brown eye. You've died, but you've come back, a new person, right? To transcend old habits. But then one day a sneaky little voice whispers, fuck it, just do it, mate. 6 months later, you're back in the dopamine dungeon, covered in shame glaze and Biscoff crumbs, wondering, how the hell did this happen? You ever wonder why you lose control again and again? And it's not some demon or some woo-woo bullshit. Maybe a little bit. It's not a common entity people encounter during DMT trips, like tricksters and elves and all this kind of stuff, aliens, Mother Gaia, but it's there. For simplicity's sakes, we're going to call this entity the worm. Which I guess is a more niche archetype, but it's undeniably intertwined with the human experience, which we're going to get into. But make no mistake, there is a worm inside you. And it does literally control your mind, especially if you go unconscious. It puppeteers your thoughts. It feeds on dopamine, chaos, self-sabotage, even if it destroys you slowly. And it's not just inside you, it builds the very loops you live in. And perhaps the entity behind your addiction. Let me show you what I mean.
Hey man, you shut your pretty little mouth. Did you hear me, boy?
Don't mind him, mate.
Amigo, you think telling them shit will change anything? Hermano, they'll be sucking on my sansara teeth soon enough. You can't escape el gusano.
We all want to grow, right? Which is one of the tricky paradoxes of the human experience, is that we all want to grow and progress, and that's part of our blueprint. But there's also something that causes us to go towards entropy and destroy ourselves. And it doesn't have to be extreme, like going crazy on the old crack pipe. It can be something as simple as sugar, which you think, whatever, it's just a few chocolate bars. But you times that by decades and then boom, now you're suffering in pain. So it's really tricky because with human beings, we want to change, we want to do the right thing, we want to avoid destructive patterns, but there's this an impulse, a whisper, a pull towards going back to these cycles. And why is this? Even after ego death, even after all these transcendental spiritual experiences where we face our shadow self and do all that shit, therapy, blah, 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 blah. Name it. Doesn't matter. I'm sure many of you have probably tried it all. But basically, we all want to improve, but there's a clear force throwing us for a loop. No matter how much facing our shadows and crying about our traumas in therapy, and it does help, kind of, sort of, sometimes. But there's a clear force within us that doesn't quite go away. Sometimes it's like a dormant volcano that explodes in the most unexpected times. So I was addicted since a child, really. Started with sugar and video games, and over time just swapped one thing for another, really. Even though I got to say, as a child, it was much more uncontrollable. It was like handling a hose that was squirting an intense pressure of water. It was just like, whoa, it was fucking splashing everyone. And over time, you learn to control it a little bit, but there's always going to be like an unexpected, whoop, sorry. As I got older, this addictive trait kind of just swapped one thing for another. Sometimes it was towards something positive, like a creative project. And other times, not so bueno. And with the last decade, I kind of went back and forth with spirituality, religion, self-help programs, sport, Carl Jung, traveling, getting married, chasing my dream, finding purpose, like doing all these things you're supposed to do as a human being to feel complete and individuated or whatever, actualized. But those old destructive loops, they come at you when you least expect it, like a beast that's been chained up for years, and see that you've loosened your grip for just a moment and it's like, whoosh. You ever have your dog like that? Maybe you don't walk it in a long time, and as soon as it sees its opportunity, it just, yeah, that's addiction sometimes. Even ego death can't completely destroy these loops, let's say these addictions, the worm, we'll call it. In fact, the worm is beyond such spiritual experiences because it's so rooted in reality, which we're going to talk about very soon. But this is the trap. The moment you sing in the heavens, I've transcended it, the worm just evolved alongside you, like a Pokemon. It knows your mind inside out because it lives in it. It evolved with you. It disguises your self-sabotage as stress relief. It rebrands your escapism as integration time. It knows you better than you know yourself. What the fuck is the worm? When I say the worm, I'm not talking about some cartoon demon hijacking your soul. It's a symbol, an archetypical pattern wired into biology, psychology, and myth. What's an archetype? It's basically a psychic blueprint. Just like DNA codes the body, archetypes code the mind. Carl Jung called them structures of the collective unconscious that shape how we feel, act, and think. You don't need to believe in souls. The effect is real either way. The worm shows up as biological parasites, like tapeworms and microbes, but also mental parasites that feeds on shame and addiction loops, which feeds right back into the biology, of course. The worm often shows up as avoidance and dopamine chasing. The voice that whispers, just one more, mate. One more drink, one more wank. But why call it the worm? Why don't we just call it compulsion, animal instinct, the reptilian brain, or whatever? Why call it the worm? Because the brain understands story, not spreadsheets. The unconscious doesn't do too well with very specific facts. You know what I mean? It does well and understands and integrates and emotionally processes through story and archetypes. That's why we're a culture so obsessed with freaking story. And that's why we have transpersonal psychology, and why Carl Jung is such a prominent figure in psychoanalysis, is because he understood the power of archetypes and symbols, and how human beings are just naturally drawn to this, and it helps us understand our situation better. Metaphors speak to your subconscious, and naming it gives it shape. It just makes it easier to confront and deal with. So before your rational brain checks out thinking this is all just metaphor and woo-woo, because here's the truth. Just because something is abstract doesn't mean it's not real. The most powerful forces in life are invisible. Gravity, time, trauma, belief. Symbols like the worm isn't fantasy, they're patterns, and patterns are real. They shape behavior, biology, and destiny. The Hermetists said, as above so below, meaning that the symbolic reflects the biological. But unlike machine elves and fairies, even though powerful symbolic truth, the entity we're going to talk about today is also very much rooted in biology and evolution. Long before Wi-Fi and AI, instead of fighting ads, we were fighting for survival on a daily basis. And our most dangerous foe wasn't even jaguar or other dangerous people. Our biggest enemy was invisible. Still is. Parasites and worm-like entities. Not metaphorical ones, real, squirming, shape-shifting organisms that hijack your biology and influence you. They manipulate your cravings. They bend your decisions. Over thousands of years, we co-evolved with them. We didn't just adapt to outrun predators. We evolved behaviors to escape parasites. Through sex selection, gene mutation, and even cultural rituals. And when we invented science and microscopes and thought we'd outsmarted them, well, they just got smarter. They moved from the gut to the psyche. The worm doesn't care if you meditate, doesn't care if you believe in God or have a purpose or take supplements. Shit, they don't even care if you break the loop. Having the conscious awareness alone won't stop the worm. Do you know how much I've tried to stop my chocolate addiction? My whole life, and it's like sometimes sometimes you go through cycles where you're like, I'm pretty good, I transcended it. But that desire, that pull, even if you don't listen to it, it never goes away, because the worm in your gut, it wants to get fed that sugar. Because here's the truth, we all want to get better, right? But how many of us are willing to change? And that's the crux of the loop, isn't it? Is that most of us want to get better, whether it's our life situation or our health or looks or fitness, whatever it is, but we want to stay the same. I would love to get big and strong and muscular, but I don't want to be that guy who really takes it to the next level and will prioritize gym over pretty much everything else in his life. It's an identity shift, and very, very difficult, especially the older you get. You want to feel better while staying the same. That's the loop in a nutshell. And this is where the worm starts to hijack your mind. And dude, I get it. I am by no way above any of you when it comes to this, because I freaking love pleasure. I love feeling good. And especially using spirituality to dress it up all nicely. Makes you feel even better, because now you're in this pleasurable state, but then you're also like, yeah, but this is good for me. Sometimes it is, but you know when it's not. The worm isn't a demon. It's a pattern that loves being fed. That's the underlying symbolism of what the worm is. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a literal earthworm. It just loves being fed, and that's its end goal, is to feed it sugar. The definition of a parasite is that it's not actually giving anything to the host. It's just taking away energy, and that's what a parasite is. And it's not just in your gut biome, but mental parasites, even spiritual parasites, certain forces that are just draining your energy. So the worm is a pattern that loves being fed. And this is where the loop comes into play, because I want you to imagine the worm sort of like a siren. You know the sirens in the old mythologies where the sailors go out to sea and they sing beautiful songs and they get entranced because they want to put their pee-pee in their vagine, but it turns out that it was a trap and they get killed or whatever. Well, a worm is kind of like that. It lures you in with pleasure and sugar and hedonism and all that kind of stuff, but really it's feeding, well, shit, on a biological level, disease, diabetes, we can go on and on and on. Whereas the mind, it feeds on addiction and negativity loops. Whatever will destroy your self-esteem to then go into shame mode and feed the worm even more sugar. Because it's not just about sugar, it's tied in with emotions, trauma, identity, your psyche. It's a whole package, right? But the worm's main weapon is dopamine loops. But is there a way out?
Oh yeah, amigo. Just like the Wheel of Fortune, you will never get out. You and me, amigo, we are binded for the rest of time. What do you think about that, bitch?
Yeah, we'll see about that. Quick summary of the multi-dimensional nature of the worm. So biological, we all know tapeworms, where they feed off nutrients and weaken the host's system, often without the host noticing for a long time. That's how diseases and all this fucked up shit, it just sneaks up on you, and you just all of a sudden you're like, oh, I think I gotta go to the doctor. They open you up and it's just, it's a horror show. What the fuck? Yeah, you have 2 weeks to live. What? I didn't even, you son of a bitch. And then all those innocent Reese's are like, goddamn worm.
Goddamn worm, got me again.
The spiritual level of the worm is really the unconscious ego loop. Now, the worm symbolizes unconscious patterns, addictions, and inherited trauma that feed off your energy. As above, so below. Just as a parasite enters the gut and lives undetected, a shame pattern or destructive belief can burrow into the psyche, feeding off self-worth, looping your behavior, and creating spiritual malnutrition. The worm doesn't just feed on your habits, it feeds on your neurology. And if you've got ADHD, congratulations. Your brain type is specifically wired to be vulnerable to these dopamine loops. This is because of the low dopamine baseline and overall genetic vulnerability to addictions. Because the worm, it whispers, just one more. Suddenly, 4 hours later, and you're deep into conspiracy doco eating chips off your chest. You're not lazy, you're looped. And the ADHD brain isn't broken, it's just unanchored. And the worm thrives in chaos. So whether it's trauma, addiction, or just a neurological roulette of birth, the worm finds its way in. And if you want to break the loop, you're going to need more than just awareness. So I pulled this card the other day, and this is the Two of Discs by the Aleister Crowley Thoth Tarot deck. And of all the cards in the tarot, this is by far the closest of that worm entity that I'm talking about. Because I kind of look at, we were talking about loops before, and this kind of ties in with that Ouroboros, that snake eating its own tail. Yeah, technically it's a snake, but still worm-like. This is freaking bang on to the worm archetype. Addiction, compulsion, transformation through embracing decay, yin-yang duality, balance, polarity. Because the thing is, this card isn't just about change, it's about harnessing cyclical energy consciously. But on this channel, I like to take you to a dark place sometimes, but we're going to come out the other side. But let me just, how do I soften your expectation? I'm not going to teach you, oh, this is how you kill the worm and never go through an addiction loop again, because that's probably not going to happen. And at the very best, that addiction loop will just have to get funneled into something else, either less destructive or more healthy. But it doesn't go away because you can't kill the worm. A lot of smart people believe that parasites evolved alongside humans, and so it's been around for millions of years. And so there is a clear integration within our system. And so the best thing you can do is not to try and kill the worm, because that will only make it stronger. It's like trying to kill the ego. It's just going to bounce back. And then it's going to have to adapt and be more slippery. And now because you're ignoring it, it kind of becomes more powerful that way. And not kind of, it does. And so with the worm, I would say it's more about taming it. The Ouroboros, this card isn't just about change. It's about harnessing cyclical energy consciously. You don't fight the worm by resisting it. You ride it, expose it, pattern it. It's an invitation to become the alchemist. Use shadow to create light. Shame becomes story. Compulsion becomes myth. All that shit. It really comes down to mental transmutation. I used to think that ego death was the finish line, but I didn't realize the worm doesn't fear death. It recycles it. That's the thing about parasites. And the only way out is through rhythm, through conscious loops, through structure. So anyways, here are your other mate Tom's tips on how to tame the worm. Meditation. Understanding that hunger is just a sensation. Avoid spiking insulin. Tame the worm like we tame a wild horse. Be happily busy, productive, or play. Eat slow. Start the day with veggies or fruit, then protein, then carbs, and then sugars. Healing isn't just about awareness, it's about starving the worm, and that takes a protocol. So number 1, you want to starve it. Fasting, cutting dopamine hits, parasite flush. Also, ritual over routine. Replace automated dopamine habits with intentional practices that anchor you in presence. Through cold plunges. The worm hates fucking cold water, I'll tell you that. Chanting, dancing, breath work. Something to get your body moving, but tying it into some sort of a spiritual practice, even if you're not religious or that kind of stuff, but just, Number 3, rebuild the nervous system. You're not just battling thought patterns, you're reprogramming biology. And that's tough and takes time. Because addiction is not just about willpower or awareness, it's a parasitic pattern that hijacks your biology and identity from the inside out. That's why addiction isn't as easy as just, clearly this is bad for me. Duh, just use your logical brain, just stop doing it. It's like, that's the point of a parasite. It's something that hijacks the host, and it's not to blame it on other, because you don't want to make these other invisible forces like, it's all that, it's not me, because you got to take responsibility, of course. And that's part of taking responsibility, is knowing that, hey, this is a part of me. This duality, this dark side, this cycles, seasons. Sometimes I just can't control it. And I got to accept that and learn to deal with it, roll with the punches, right? If you do have ADHD, you know how fast the mental loops can pull you in. 1 minute you're inspired, the next you're reorganizing your spice rack. 5 tabs deep into a dopamine chase you didn't plan for. So without a system or even chemical support, your dopamine regulation gets hijacked. Your brain is wired for hunting, scanning, reacting. It's the hunter brain, evolved for survival, not spreadsheets. You're designed to chase novelty, not sit still and color inside the lines. In the ADHD brain, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, has reduced dopamine receptor sensitivity. That's why you forget what you're doing mid-task, while you impulsively scroll, snack, or start something new. It's so common for these loops where it could be 6 months pass, but it feels like 6 days for you. It's like that scene in Interstellar. That's ADHD time distortion. That's the worm running the clock. So if you don't have anchors, systems, support, externalized memory tools, the worm wins by default. And some of you are going to be more vulnerable to these addiction loops than others, which is why systems are so freaking important. And even with systems, you're still going to fall, but at least you won't fall as often, and at least when you do fall, you'll get back up quicker. That's what this is all about. Minimizing damage, really. So there is no killing the worm. It's part of us. It's within us.
I knew one day you will accept me, amigo. Come on, let's get a drink, huh?
So basically the moral of the story, or this whole video, without maps, reminders, or people who reflect your goals back to you, the worm just becomes a shapeshifter and controls your loops even more, putting you in autopilot mode. It doesn't just trap you in one loop, it keeps rewriting the loop so you don't even know you're in one. This is why tools like sticky notes, journaling systems, accountability buddies, coaching, written rituals, systems that work without willpower can be so useful. That's the thing, you don't need to try harder. That just drains willpower, which just gives more power to these parasitic entities that wants you to do bad shit instead of good shit, to eat the freaking peanut butter cup instead of the salad, to watch Netflix instead of doing work. So really, it's about building your environment in a way that just reminds you. You got to treat yourself like, oh, I'm like a child that can fall over easily and be vulnerable. But of course, if you have too big of an ego and think, oh, that's just for weak people, and then, you know, make it visible, make it easier for yourself, make it repeatable. Outsmart the loop by designing your own. Otherwise, the worm will keep writing your script while you think you're the author. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this super bizarre, weird video, because I was looking online and I'm like, man, there's no real worm archetype videos, and it's not very common entity people see, but it's a symbolic language that me and my friends have been using for a long time. Me and my other mate Tom. There's this whole part of you that's like, we just call it the worm. Like, worm's hungry, mate. You gonna feed it? Yeah, better feed the worm, otherwise it's gonna throw me in a loop, mate. But I like kind of thinking about it this way, this mythological framing of compulsions, addictions, loops. Hopefully this was useful in any way, if not at the very least somewhat entertaining or interesting. Yeah, anyways, catch you guys next time.
See you mañana, amigo. Same loop, same time, huh?
Yeah, see you then.